Ryan, what's on your radar?
There's been a lot of frustration with Joe Biden's unwillingness or inability to fulfill his promise to lift the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. But there's something he could do with the stroke of a pen that would also have enormous implications for wages. It has to do with what's known as the overtime threshold. Now, if you're technically a salaried employee, but you make below a certain threshold, companies are required to pay you overtime if you go over 40 hours. Now, the logic is simple. If you let companies get around minimum wage laws by saying you're getting paid a salary, then that's what they'll all do, and all sorts of people who are really employees will get classified as managers. Now, for years, that threshold didn't keep up with reality. It languished in the low 20,000s, 23,660 to be exact, for much of the Bush administration and deep into the Obama administration. Now, to Obama's credit, he lifted the threshold substantially to $50,440, meaning anybody who made less than that was owed overtime, even if the company was pretending they're a salaried manager. Now, to Obama's discredit, he didn't roll the rule out until his second last year of his second term. And under the Congressional Review Act, that meant the next president could roll the rule back. Obama thought the next president would be Hillary Clinton, so it wouldn't matter. But of course, it wasn't. It was Trump. And for all the MAGA talk about being pro-worker, one of the first things Trump's administration did is upend that rule and set the number down to $35,568. So I recently moderated a panel at a conference put on by the group Patriotic Millionaires. These are super rich liberals who call for tax increases on themselves. The conference was called Oligarchs versus All of Us, and Representative Pramila Jayapal told me this about the overtime threshold.
Congressman Jayapal, what have you been hearing lately from the White House about what they're planning to do when it comes to executive actions?
Well, the Progressive Caucus back in December, we decided we were going to unveil this slate of executive actions and pursue a two-track strategy, one for legislation, one for executive actions. We got to use every tool in our toolbox to deliver real results for people. And there are significant things that we can do for tens of millions of people. And so we unveiled that a couple of weeks ago. We sat down with the president last week to go through our list. The overtime threshold, if we raise that threshold, we will actually help 30 million people to get a raise across the country. That's something that can be done right now.
The two questions for Biden are how quickly he and Labor Secretary Marty Walsh will move and how high they can push the threshold. Jayapal told me they want to make it $82,000 a year by 2026. Now, currently, if you're, say, a manager at Dollar General and you make $36,000 a year, that would work out to about $18 an hour for a 40-hour week. But the stores are severely understaffed and they don't let the managers hire many people, so the quote-unquote managers are working the register, stocking the shelves, and otherwise keeping the store running. There's nothing wrong with that, but Dollar General is getting a lot of that labor for free. In order to keep it running, the manager might have to work 80 hours rather than 40 or 50, which means that now they're making $9 an hour, which is below the minimum wage in many states. 60 hours, for instance, would mean $12 an hour. So a Dollar General manager actually made a series of viral TikToks about working conditions at the store, posting under the handle, Always Mrs. Grundle. Take a look.
I've been doing this for 3 years, one day off. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. And I'm like, what do I work for? I don't get to enjoy being home. I don't get to enjoy any of the stuff that I work so hard for because I feel as though the company expects store managers and even some assistants to literally dedicate their life to this job. You can ask my husband, you can ask anybody who knows me. I am always here. I basically live here. Even my customers say it when they see me. They wonder when I'm actually going to get a day off. I have had my crew literally kick me out of the store and tell me to go home because I am here so much. So it's to the point now to where, whatever happens, happens. But something needs to be said, and there needs to be some changes that needs to happen, or they're probably going to end up losing a lot of people. Over time, things have just gotten worse. Our trucks are no longer scheduled. They just show up whenever the hell they want to. Hiring people is basically impossible because they don't want to pay what all these other companies are paying, but we expect them to do 10 times more work than what these other companies are telling them they have to do. This company makes plenty of money to be able to pay their employees well and to be able to add sufficient labor to these stores to where everybody's not killing themselves to try to get everything done.
So let's take a look at how much in wages Dollar General is saving by not paying its managers hourly wages. So Glassdoor puts an average Dollar General salary at $48,000 a year. Assistant managers obviously make much less. So if a person is making $18 an hour and works 60 hours, the second 20 hours is supposed to be OT, time and a half, which would be an extra $540 a week. As Jayapal said, some 30 million people would be affected by this change, though the number is much higher when you factor in the people indirectly benefited. Now, most companies aren't going to suddenly start giving overworked workers an extra $500 a week. What they'll do instead is raise their base salaries to get over the threshold or cut back on hours for those they have to now pay hourly. I saw that at my own news outlet, the Huffington Post, back in 2015 when Obama announced the higher threshold. The corporate overlords, it was owned by Verizon at the time, sent out a memo saying they wanted the lowest base salary to be set above the new $50,000 threshold, where before it had been set significantly below that. So the new rule didn't produce inflation in 2015 or 2016 before it was rolled back in 2017. So companies are already boosting prices as quickly as they can, taking advantage of the climate of inflation. But it's not simply because of rising costs. Corporate profits are now at record highs. Raising the overtime threshold would cut into those profits and require companies to spend some of that money starting to treat workers fairly. And so Dollar General is a great example because that woman in particular talks about how she's just putting in absolutely endless hours, and it's impossible for her to hire the amount of labor that they need in the store. And why is that? Because Dollar General's like, why would we give you money to hire people to do labor in the work when we're getting you to do it for free on this $48,000 a year salary?
Yeah, well, and this is where I feel like there's this synergy between our radars in the sense that I really fundamentally believe a lot of what the right has missed is that this moral bankruptcy. That's not to say there haven't always been problems at the top of major corporations. Of course they have. But the moral bankruptcy that upsets conservatives on cultural issues that they see from corporate America, it's the same moral bankruptcy that's informing the way that they treat their employees. And when you have a lot of Dollar General stores are in these totally ravaged communities that have just been absolutely ravaged by globalization. And you have workers in this kind of environment, it's so much easier these days to exploit. And that's a huge problem that the market has not fixed and is not going to fix just automatically. So I actually, those TikToks are really helpful, and that's not to say, this should all, it's not to say that like people should, get every single little demand, but the point is that workers are being mistreated by the heads of these corporations, and you're just sitting back and saying the market will solve the problem. Right.
And the general counsel's office at a place like Dollar General has I'm sure they have an entire team of people that's working on kind of their labor policy, and how can we go into a state that has a higher minimum wage than we'd like to pay our employees, and pay them less than that.
Yeah.
And make it legal. And the way you do it is say, well, congratulations, you're a salaried employee. And that can feel really good to people because it gets you in the door, and they'll talk about career advancement. They're going to move you up through the corporate ladder. All these carrots that they're pretending that they're going to dangle in front of you, when in fact it's all intended just to get you to say, yeah, great, I'll take the $48,000 a year salary. That's great. That's more than I was making before. And then 3 years later, you realize, wait, if I do the math on this, I'm actually making much less, and there's no corporate ladder here. Yeah. They're just driving me into the ground.
Well, and this is another thing. This is not just this perfect free market system, right? This is already government regulations, right? There are already government regulations about wages, for instance. So you're not operating in this sort of Randian fantasy. Right. You already have the government regulating the way that business is done. And so you have to make sure the regulations, if we're operating in a system where Republicans concede that some regulation is necessary, and
Robbie will be back tomorrow.
Yeah, Robbie will be back tomorrow to say abolish the minimum wage. But if you're already operating in that environment, it's just different privileges, right? Like you're just saying there are different privileges for different businesses at different times.
Just make it fair.
If the situation's being abused, you have to make it fair. And some of this stuff is not even on Republicans' radar because they don't have the pipeline to like labor organizations, which many of which are corrupt and I think are bad, but that's not even in their ear. So this is not something that anybody talks about on the right, but it's a good example of it's like we have minimum wage laws, and that's what's pushing people to exploit this law.
Yeah.
So make it fair.
Yeah, make it fair.
Yeah.
Sounds good. All right, Team Rising joins us next. Stick around.